Maria Sanchez sat perfectly still in the courtroom, her calloused hands folded on the defendant's table, her dark eyes fixed on the polished wood grain beneath her fingertips. She had faced armed insurgents in the mountains of Afghanistan. She had jumped from helicopters into hostile waters in the dead of night. She had carried wounded teammates through enemy fire without flinching. But sitting here, listening to Officer Derek Matthews weave his lies with such casual confidence, she felt a different kind of fury. The cold, controlled anger of someone who knows the truth but must wait for the right moment to speak it. "Your Honor," Matthews said, adjusting his police uniform with practiced precision, "the defendant became aggressive when I approached her vehicle. She refused to comply with basic commands, showed signs of intoxication, and became verbally abusive when I attempted to conduct a field sobriety test." He glanced at Maria with barely concealed disdain. "In my 15 years on the force, I've dealt with hundreds of these cases. Illegal immigrants who think they're above the law, who come here and—" Objection. Maria's public defender, a tired-looking woman named Janet Chen, shot to her feet. Officer Matthews is making assumptions not in evidence and engaging in prejudicial statements. The judge, an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses, nodded wearily. Sustained. Officer Matthews, stick to the facts of the traffic stop, please. Matthews barely paused, that same smug smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Of course, Your Honor. As I was saying, the defendant's behavior was consistent with someone under the influence. When I asked for her license and registration, she fumbled through her glove compartment, couldn't answer simple questions about where she was going, and her eyes were bloodshot and watery." Maria's jaw tightened. Every word was a fabrication, every detail carefully constructed to paint her as exactly what Matthews assumed she was. Just another Latina woman he could push around, another immigrant he could intimidate with his badge and his lies. He didn't know that her fumbling had been due to hands still shaking from 18 hours of trauma surgery training at the VA hospital. He didn't know her bloodshot eyes came from 72 hours without sleep, volunteering at a community center while completing her medical certification. He didn't know that the verbal abuse he described had actually been her calmly explaining that she was a veteran and asking why he was treating her so aggressively. Most importantly, he didn't know who she really was. But Maria knew who he was. She'd seen his type before. Men who wore authority like armor, who used their power to compensate for their own inadequacies, who targeted those they perceived as vulnerable. In her 8 years as a Navy SEAL, one of the first women to complete the grueling BUD-S training and serve in naval special warfare, she had encountered plenty of men who underestimated her. Some had learned, others never got the chance. She had chosen not to reveal her military background when she was arrested. Partly because she wanted to see how the system would treat someone they assumed was powerless. Partly because she had been trained to observe, to gather intelligence, to wait for the exact right moment to act. And partly because something in Matthew's eyes that night, that particular gleam of satisfaction when he slapped the handcuffs on her wrists, told her this wasn't his first time abusing his authority. The field breathalyzer test showed a blood alcohol content of 0.09, Matthews continued, pulling a small device from his evidence bag. "Just over the legal limit, which is why I placed her under arrest." Janet Chen leaned over to whisper urgently in Maria's ear. "This isn't looking good. That breathalyzer reading is going to be hard to fight. If you have anything at all, that can help your case, now would be the time." Maria gave the slightest shake of her head. "Not yet," she murmured back. Let him finish. She had learned patience in the hardest school imaginable. During Hell Week at BUD-S, when her body screamed for rest and her mind begged her to quit, she had learned to endure. During long surveillance operations in hostile territory, waiting hours or days for the perfect moment to strike, she had learned to trust her instincts. And her instincts now told her that Officer Matthews was about to overplay his hand. After the arrest, Matthews said, warming to his narrative, the defendant tried to claim she was some kind of military veteran. She said she served her country and deserved respect. He actually made air quotes with his fingers, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Your Honor, I've seen this tactic before. People claim military service to gain sympathy, to make themselves seem more credible. But when I asked for her military ID, she couldn't produce one. When I asked what branch she served in, she refused to answer. Classic signs of stolen valor, in my professional opinion. Maria's eyes narrowed. There it was, the lie that went too far. Because she had answered his question. She had told him, clearly and calmly, that she served in the Navy. She had explained that her military ID was in her gym bag in the trunk, and offered to retrieve it. He had refused to let her, had laughed in her face, had told her that a little woman like you couldn't possibly be anything more than a clerk or a cook even if she was telling the truth. She had also recorded the entire interaction on her phone, which had been mounted on her dashboard. Matthews had been too busy performing for his own body camera, which, she had later learned through a records request, had mysteriously malfunctioned during her stop, to notice her phone. Furthermore, Matthews continued, gaining momentum. During booking, the defendant became increasingly hostile. She demanded special treatment, claimed she knew her rights, and tried to intimidate the processing officers with threats about lawyers and investigations. He shook his head with what looked like genuine regret. It's unfortunate, Your Honor, but we see this attitude all too often in certain communities. A lack of respect for law enforcement, a sense of entitlement, a refusal to take responsibility for their actions. In the gallery, Maria could hear murmurs of agreement from a handful of spectators. She recognized a few off-duty officers who had come to support their colleague. But she also saw other faces, younger people, people of color, immigrants like her parents, whose expressions reflected a weary familiarity with stories like the one Matthews was telling. The judge looked at Maria over his glasses. Does the defendant wish to testify on her own behalf? Janet Chen stood quickly. Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to request a brief recess to consult with my client. Denied, the judge said, not unkindly. We've already had 2 delays in this case, Ms. Chen. Let's move forward. Ms. Sanchez, do you wish to take the stand? Maria rose to her feet in one smooth motion, the kind of movement that came from years of physical training and combat readiness. Yes, Your Honor, I do. As she walked to the witness stand, she caught Matthew's eye. He was still smiling that same condescending smile, utterly confident in his victory. After all, who would the court believe? A decorated police officer with 15 years of service, or a Latina woman with no apparent connections, no powerful advocate, no voice that carried weight in these hallowed halls of justice? He was about to find out. After being sworn in, Maria sat down and looked directly at the judge. When she spoke, her voice was calm, clear, and carried the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to giving briefings in high-pressure situations. Your Honor, my name is Lieutenant Maria Elena Sanchez, United States Navy. Service number 7856324. I am a Naval Special Warfare Operator, what civilians commonly call a Navy SEAL, currently assigned to SEAL Team 3 based out of Naval Base Coronado. I have served 8 years on active duty, with 4 combat deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. I hold the Navy Cross for Valor, 2 bronze stars with Valor device, and a Purple Heart. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Matthew's face had gone white, his mouth slightly open in shock. Several of the off-duty officers in the gallery leaned forward, suddenly paying much closer attention. Maria continued, her tone never changing. On the night in question, I was driving home from an 18-hour shift at the VA hospital where I volunteer as a surgical assistant, using my military medical training to help veterans. I had not consumed any alcohol. I was not impaired. I was not aggressive or hostile. I complied with every legal command Officer Matthews gave me. She reached into the folder Janet Chen had placed on the stand. I have several pieces of evidence I'd like to present to the court. First, a time-stamped receipt from the VA hospital showing I was on duty until 11:47 p.m., 20 minutes before Officer Matthews pulled me over. Second, a sworn statement from 3 witnesses who were with me at the hospital and can attest to my sobriety. Third, my military ID, which Officer Matthews claimed I couldn't produce because he refused to let me retrieve it from my vehicle. Janet Chen was now standing, her earlier exhaustion replaced by barely contained excitement. Your Honor, I'd also like to present dashcam footage from Ms. Sanchez's personal vehicle, which captures the entire traffic stop. The judge gestured for the video to be played. For the next 15 minutes, the courtroom watched a very different version of events than Matthews had described. The footage showed Maria being polite and cooperative, clearly explaining her military service, asking respectfully why she was being treated so aggressively. It showed Matthews becoming increasingly hostile, making derogatory comments about her ethnicity, refusing her requests to contact Navy legal services. And critically, it showed the moment when Matthews conducted the breathalyzer test, and the device initially reading 0.00 before he took it back to his patrol car for several minutes, returning with a reading of 0.09. When the video ended, the silence in the courtroom was deafening. Maria spoke again, her voice still controlled but now carrying an edge of steel. "Your Honor, I didn't reveal my military background immediately because I wanted to see how I would be treated as just another Latina woman. I wanted to understand what happens to people who don't have the resources or status to fight back. What I discovered is that Officer Matthews has a pattern of targeting minorities, falsifying evidence, and abusing his authority." She pulled out another document. "Through my security clearance and connections in federal law enforcement, I was able to obtain records showing that Officer Matthews has been the subject of 17 internal complaints in the past 5 years, all from people of color, mostly women, all dropped or dismissed. I also found 3 other cases where breathalyzer evidence was questioned but never fully investigated." Matthews finally found his voice. "This is, Your Honor, she can't just be quiet, Officer Matthews," the judge said sharply. His face had transformed from weary patience to barely controlled anger. "Ms. Sanchez, you said you hold the Navy Cross. Do you mind telling the court what you received it for?" Maria hesitated. She didn't like talking about that day, about the things she had done, the people she hadn't been able to save. But she could see where the judge was going with this. "I received it for actions during an operation in Helmand Province, Afghanistan," she said quietly. "My team was ambushed. Our team leader was killed immediately. I took command, coordinated our defense, carried 3 wounded teammates to safety under heavy fire, and then returned to recover our fallen. I stayed in a kill zone for 40 minutes to make sure no one was left behind.